we interrupt this incredibly awesome music to bring you some incredibly awesome political talk on Damn Radio.
Hello, good evening, welcome. I am Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor. You are listening to Damn Radio, live from the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. What day is today? Monday, this Monday night. And here we are like we are every night from 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. with me. Highly entertaining. If you feel like calling in tonight, you might do so. 573-746-8020. Feel free to send in emails that I rarely read at live@damradio.com or to my personal email at samuelt@internationalflavor.com. I can't remember if I reported this or not. I think I did, but I got a request last week to do a regular TV and radio appearance on Russian TV. And I was asked to do that. The first thing was this morning. And basically what we're going to do is I'm going to submit my articles. And my article regarding nuclear testing was, like I did in a show last week, it was published in the Russian news this morning, or yesterday, I believe. No, it was this morning. It went out this morning. And it was published. They published an article of mine about a week ago, and then this is like article number 5 or something that they have published of mine in Russian, that I basically do a summary of my deep dive shows and turn them into a Russian version in a written article format. And then I do some sort of small blurb with them on various topics. A couple of weeks ago, did an interview, lasted about 20 minutes, half an hour. And then they take bits and pieces of it and put it out, or they'll take my commentary and turn it into stories. But what we're going to try to do, there's a girl over there that I met at the BRICS conference, and her name is Anna Yevgenyevna Cherkasova, and she Anna would be the short word, but formal as Anna Yevgenyevna, and she is one of the editors at this newspaper, at this outlet, because it has TV, radio, and a pretty strong internet presence. And so I found it, what I told them was that I would appreciate at least knowing a topic, right? Before we just get on and I start, I don't know what, because, and this is one of the things, I'll tell you a funny interpreter story, and it wasn't funny at the time, trust me on this. But when I was a kid, when I lived in Washington, D.C., I was very young. I wonder how old I was at that time. Couldn't have been, well, I don't know. I was still working at the Nevada nuclear test site, so I had to have been close to, call it 28, maybe 29 was the oldest that I would have been at that time. Very responsible position for a guy as young as I was. And had to be in 94, maybe late 93, coming to the end of my active service in Washington, D.C. And I got one of the commanders that always preferred to have me as his interpreter. I mean, he wanted me as his interpreter every time. He was somehow connected with the governor of the state of Colorado, who I don't remember his name at the time, but they were creating a connection with a drilling company that was going to be in former Soviet Republic of Kazakhstan, plus have some drilling operations in the Ural Mountains and stuff like that. And I this guy asked me, he said, do you want to make some extra money? Well, hell yeah. I want to make some extra money. What do I have to do? He says, nothing. He goes, you just got to go interpret. He said, there's a Russian oil mogul, some guy that is coming over. And what was going on at that time was everybody was taking chunks of business, and basically what was happening when the Soviet Union collapsed. Let me give you an example. So a factory closes down, right? And this, doesn't close down, but it's no longer operated by state funds. So everything is allegedly being privatized. So what really happened? The same people who ran the factories, call it, let's say you got a factory making baby food, and this baby food factory produces, 20, 30, 40 different versions of baby food, and they send it out. And it's run the same way that a baby food factory here in the United States would be run. You got a plant manager, you got, operations guys that are supervisors, managers. You have administration, accounting, all of these other things. So you have these management teams that when the factories are suddenly being privatized, the managers are trying to come up with the way to take the ownership of these factories and transfer it to the people that work at the factories. Because what the process was back then was allegedly everything was owned by the people anyway. So the workers control the means of production, blah, blah, blah. All those things from Marxism that say that everybody's equal, But some are more equal than others, of course, under the communist rule and under Marxism and stuff like that. And so the people are trying to figure out what to do to privatize these things. And so Russia was capitalist overnight, right? This screwed everyone. Okay, so everybody gets their share of the factory. So everybody gets their share. And so what would happen would be the guy on the line, the cooking line of cooking the food, he don't know how to run a plant. The guy on the bottling line, he don't know how to run a plant, but everybody's getting their share of the factory. And so everybody would pool their shares, but the people who had more money on the top ends were better suited to do several things. One, run a factory, and two, figure out how to privatize and some guy that's just bottling food on the plant. He's just trying to survive and feed his family and so stuff like that. So what was happening was the people at the top were ending up with the plant managers, let's call it, are ending up with the whole plant under their control, just like before, and all the ownership shares, and they're giving away. The people down below are just trying to figure out how to survive a month or two, and it was horrible times for people. And if they could possibly keep the plant running, well, there wasn't a lot of money in it because nobody had any money. And so people were getting these were horror story times. This was like the U.S. Depression era, right? Only probably worse. Because these people aren't even getting paid in cash; they're getting paid with baby food. So you'd come to get your paycheck, and instead you'd get several cases of baby food, and then you'd take your baby food out and you'd try to trade some baby food to get other things that you need for your family. My spouse, her mother, told stories about They tell stories about getting paid in canned goods. that they got canned goods, and that's all they had, and they had to trade up the canned goods to other types of things. So in the 90s, these were horrible times for them. And so, long story short, this was going on in many, many industries. And some of the biggest ones where this was going on were places that were going to be a huge impact on the rest of the world. And they were attempting to privatize oil fields, attempting to privatize fertilizer factories that have massive exports all over the world and always have. And so I was tasked to, and this is a long, stupid story to tell you, but I want you to understand where we're going with this. And this guy that was coming over, we were going to go to the World Bank, okay? And he had a proposal, but he really had no real appointment. He had no real support. He had no real ownership of where he was going. Basically, he was trying to come over and get some kind of a Hail Mary and save this oil platform that he worked on from, I believe it was Kazakhstan, and I can't remember the guy's name, and I barely remember. I remember the lady that hired me when we talked on the phone, and we went through it, and we talked about drilling operations, and we talked about what was going on at the Nevada nuclear test site, which was heavy on drilling and equipment and upon things like that, but the terminology isn't even remotely similar, because drilling for oil is a hell of a lot different than drilling to put in a nuclear bomb, right? These are not the same thing, just so you know. And also, the topics that they were trying to discuss were something completely different. And to complicate the matter even further was that if you watch TV, and you ever have watched this, it interests me because it's I suppose sort of a professional deal for me, is I cannot, they call it simultaneous interpretation. I cannot do it. It is just some deal that does not work. My brain doesn't work that way. I can't listen to two things at once, or I can't listen to one and take it in the one ear and spout it out of my mouth at the same time. I cannot do that. And I was pretty clear that I couldn't do that. That is not what we did. We did not simultaneously interpret during arms control treaty verification. Not in the INF treaty, not in START 1, and certainly not in the Nuclear Threshold Test Ban Treaty. What you did was instead you would translate what is called consecutive, or something like that. You would basically, they would give 2 or 3 sentences, and then you would interpret the 2 or 3 sentences, and then they would give the answer would come in 2 or 3 sentences, and the other interpreter would interpret it back. Okay, so it was a very painstaking and detail-oriented process because you didn't want to not understand what was going on. So this planning came upon us very, very quickly. It was less than a week from the time I first was contacted until the time it was to get there. I had asked them to send me, kind of not a script, but sort of at least a thought process into what we were going to speak about. So I could look up some terminology or topics, and the lady didn't take me seriously. She said, well, it's Russian. Well, yeah, of course it's Russian. I said, it's English, but, hell, I don't I need to understand some of the words, or know what you're going to be talking about. I got nothing. I mean, I'm serious. I got nothing. She goes, well, you're going to meet the guy, half an hour before we get there. His flight comes in and blah, blah, blah. And then we're going to go to the World Bank in downtown D.C. and you'll interpret down there. There's a meeting that comes up and we'll have to listen to some hearings that are taking place first, because there's a whole slew of people that were discussing getting funding for various things in various industries, also in various countries, not all of them Russian speaking, but since they were talking about oil and gas, there were going to be several oil and gas people from different places. So there were several different types of people at the IMF that were International Monetary Fund and the World Bank that were all going to be there. This is my first bumping up against these guys, and I had no idea who they were. I was in arms control, right? Totally separate. So the story goes, we pick up this guy at the airport, and it was the faraway airport, the Dulles airport, not the Reagan National. Reagan National is right downtown, and it would have been 5 minutes away from the World Bank, so it was very nice that we got picked up in some limo, and I was there to meet the guy, and the governor of Colorado was not there, but his representative was, like some deputy governor or something like that, and was going with this guy, and she was an older. She was probably in her 40s, and then the guy was a pretty cool guy that came from Russia. He was somebody that I instantly liked, and he and I instantly fell into conversation, and we're speaking about some of the things we had done, and the Russian going back and forth for half an hour, going down the road, and we were, in the car. It was pretty much small talk. I asked him what we were going to talk about. He said, well, there's nothing very major that's going to go on here. And he says, I just need to be able to put out, some of the, I'm here to ask for money. And I'm here that we're going to put this out. And this is my first trip. And so I'm not positive what's going to happen here either. But we need to be able to understand what they're asking for and how these things are going to go on. And I was like, oh, well, I said, we're going to have to play it by ear, because I said, I've never been in one of these. I'm in arms control. We talk about, people think, oh, well, geez, if he can talk about nuclear arms in Russian, clearly he can talk about anything. And I can talk about taxes. I can talk about all these other things. But but important safety tip here. We get in there and we walk into a room full of, up at the front of the room, there were 7 or 8 people seated on some dais, and they were discussing various, and they were IMF and World Bank people sitting up on the top. And they were giving an overview of funding of oil interests in many different places. And this guy happened to be one of 6 or 7 oil interest people from former Soviet republics looking to get funding for their particular places. Like somebody drilling oil is different than somebody doing processing of oil products into refineries. So you had oil drilling, oil refineries, oil production, oil shipment, oil export, oil. I mean, there were all kinds of things going on. And these people were all up there sitting around talking, and not in Russian. And part of it was in other languages also. And so you're having to listen to, there's a simultaneous translator up in the front translating from English to Arabic or English to something else. And so there was a lot of different things. There was so many things going on in that room. I was just like in shock. And so these people are speaking English, and I'm listening to not only the English, but I'm listening to a simultaneous interpreter interpreting it into Arabic for the people from Azerbaijan or Kazakhstan or wherever, or in Tatarstan language, because there's some oil going on down in those areas. And then I'm supposed to take this and turn it into something coherent for this guy in a manner that I am absolutely not used to, nor had anybody told me about. And it all had to do with finances and refineries and all these other topics. The long and the short of it was, this representative of the governor was looking at me in horror when she had heard me speaking Russian with him all the way to the airport, and it was going really, really well. And we get in here, and I can't even keep track of the hearing, let alone tell the guy what's going on. And it went pretty poorly. The fortunate part was that it was recorded, and these people were paying me some ungodly amount of money for, at the time, they said for the day I was going to get paid, I don't remember, it was like an 8-hour day, and I was getting paid at least $100 an hour. It was going to be good money back then. And but it was completely crap, and the governor's office didn't want to. And I'm like, look, I really. And when we walked out of that room about 2 hours later, and my brain was completely fried. I had listened to it in English, but I had to summarize it all for him in Russian and tell him what it was going on. But anyway, I have had one, that's probably the worst one, but I had another one or two incidents where I didn't understand the terminology going in, and those will kick your rear end if you're stuck in them. And trying to keep track of this. I mean, you must know. And so now, before I get involved in something like that, I make sure that I understand at least what the topic is going to be, and whether it's going to be something that I'm going to embarrass myself with or not. And at any rate, this morning, and this is a horribly long story, I'm really sorry about that, but this morning I get an email from, and I woke up, it was, I don't know, 6:30 or so, and I got up, started getting coffee and stuff like that, and then checked my emails real quick, and it was, I got an email from Anna Yevgenyevna, and I read, she said, "Can we meet this morning at 10?" And I was like, wow. And she goes, "Literally just for 5 minutes. We just want some commentary." And so I sent it back to her. I said, "Look, I'll agree, to meet with you. You want 5 minutes of commentary that you can use on your TV before. We're going to do it by Zoom or through Telegram or whatever, and I'm perfectly happy to do that. But you need to give me what topics are of interest to you, what we are going to be talking about, because I don't want to be blindsided with something that I don't understand how to do it in the Russian language. I want to be able to at least look at it." Well, come to find out that they are very much interested in this Mamdani guy and what is going on in New York. And they, there are quite a few stories on it on the other side of the planet, not just in Russia, but in Ukraine and other places. People are interested in this because it's different than what, whether it's blown out of proportion or what. People are saying that this is something so completely different for New York, for America, for everything else. It's, frankly, I don't see it even now as a big deal. For me, I don't give a rip. But with Trump out there on True Social or wherever talking about, he don't want to, you shouldn't vote for this guy, and people all worried about, the effect he's going to have. Frankly, I don't think it's going to be much effect. 3 years, 4 years, okay, I have this argument with certain other people that we all know and love as well about the effect that Trump is going to have. I don't believe it's a permanent change. I don't believe it's anything. Our term limit, our effect on the system and effect on all of it is so short. 4 years is a blip. In the life of America, it's a blip, and it's different for places like China, where people are there for forever, and they also plan differently than us. They think differently than us, and I've talked about that several times. So I do have off-the-shelf sorts of thought processes about Mamdani, but I don't have anything concrete to say for or against him as a person, as a politician, even as a socialist. I don't necessarily care. To me, it's not all that important. But to Anna Yevgenyevna, Cherkasova is her last name, but to Anna Yevgenyevna, she wanted to speak about this topic. And so what I did was I got on and I did a bit of a search into his background, just very short. And what screwed it up was, so by the time I left my house, it was 8 o'clock. I stopped at Starbucks, got a coffee, took my time getting around. And then what I discovered was that they had given to me a 10 o'clock, but they had missed and it's a good thing I caught it, they had missed the time zone. They had put me in where I was, a month or two ago in the Florida time zone. So we're an hour before that. So really, this was going to be a 9 o'clock. So I didn't get a chance to do a whole lot of anything, and I didn't want to be embarrassed on it. And fortunately, it was only going to be 5 minutes, so there couldn't be anything all that involved in it. And so I get in, I run to my office, and I do my mini prep on it, look up the old Mamdani and what he has going on in life, and dug into it. And then we had a brief 5-minute, 7-minute conversation. And then we got to talking a little bit about my last article on the nuclear testing, which very much interests me, on the nuclear testing. Anyway, that long story about interpreting was really only to tell you how I want to make sure that I can at least speak somewhat intelligently and not I always make the joke that I'm illiterate in 2 languages. I'm a raving moron in 2 different languages. I can do it in English just like I can in Russian, but I really don't want that to be the case, and so I do try to review before I get there. But I'm very excited about this opportunity that is presenting itself, because what they're going to want to do is speak with me. And what I want to do is, because they always ask me how regular Americans think about these kind of things. It's always a specific thing. Well, what do regular Americans think about this? Well, I've always considered myself the average white man. I'm 5'9". I'm average height. I weigh 189, 192, somewhere in there. That's average weight for a guy my height. I, make the average income. I live in the middle of America. I'm just the average dude, right? All the way along. There's nothing spectacular about me. There's nothing too horrible about me. Well, depending on who you are. And so I feel that I'm about, and I think middle of the roadish type of things. I like my drill sergeant. I don't discriminate against any of you mofos, he would say. I hate every one of you equally, is what he would say. So I'm middle of the road in that regard too. And at any rate, all of that to be said, that I always go out of my way to say, look, I don't speak for America. I certainly don't speak for our government. I don't speak for Democrats or for Republicans or for anyone else. I speak for myself, but I do consider myself to be somewhat middle of the road. Now, I don't go that far in it, but I make sure that people understand that I'm just, a regular American, that I'm nobody special. I don't have, I don't know, I don't have 1 million followers. I'm not in the government. I'm not, I don't speak for anybody else. And I think that's important for me to say. But I also think that I can relate to many points of view with many points of emphasis or interest, right? And I also feel like I'm very acceptable. I accept various opinions. I don't condemn people for having certain opinions or not following certain ways. I honor other people's opinions, and so I always try to get it from that point of view. But when I go and I look back on some of the things that the opportunity that has been created for me just because I went to the BRICS conference last year, I think this is important. I want to create a Russian-American friendship society. I've created a what do you call it? A nonprofit organization, and that nonprofit organization is going to do quite a few things. I want to, as part of that, have a structure that encourages communication on things like freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of association, government overreach, targeting of individuals. Ike's camera fiasco, and it's not his, but this idiotic flock cameras, these government targeting individuals and taking away their freedoms, and I dislike that, and I always have, and it's I want to use this nonprofit setting to target government that's targeting people, and to get people familiar with what it's from both sides of the political aisle, by the way, because both sides are equally guilty in this, and they're all a bunch of scammers in my in the unfortunate history of my research into these areas. You can target. Our government is no different than the overbearing governments of many other countries, especially those that trod upon the rights, if you want to call them that, upon the God-given rights of normal people everywhere. And, I talk about it reasonably often on this platform, and I'm very glad I get the opportunity to do so. So what I thought I would do, because I have a good amount of material that I have provided or that I have reviewed in keeping with tonight's, I wanted to talk about Mamdani and his issues. I have a couple other stories I want to get to before that, but I have some of a little bit of the story from Mamdani and some of the stuff that I looked into that I want to kind of dig in and tell you what I really think about him. And I started that for my efforts in Russian this morning, but that was a very short deal. But what came of that is that we're going to have a small platform every couple of weeks. And we're trying to, so that will be a video platform. She and I get together and we do a video. The last time I did a video on Zoom, I couldn't figure out how to, which was the last version from 10 days, 2 weeks ago or whatever, that it was I had a background on Zoom that I couldn't figure out how to get rid of, and it was some seascape behind me, and I couldn't figure out how to get rid of it, and the thing started, and we would have preferred something else. Well, today she asked if I could get rid of that, and I didn't have any other picture in my Zoom, and we were ready to get started, and it was a picture of my living room which in Florida, the picture of my living room in Florida. And so that was the background for today. So next time I will organize this at some point. Remember when I started this channel with JR, how oh boy, let's call it jacked up, because I shouldn't use the words cocked up. That doesn't sound right, and so I won't do that. But I was a little jacked up for a little while trying to figure out how the technology worked, especially remotely. And I have gotten better with that, and the troubles have gone away in that regard, and for the most part. And but now I don't want to experience the same thing while I'm trying to work with a Russian audience, that I would like them to pay attention to me and not think I'm some kind of a wacko over there that can't figure out his own technology. But I'm very excited about the opportunity, and I also intend to take my certain weekly deep dives, the ones that I have time to put together a full topic chase, like my nuclear testing one from last week, which is now an article in Russian. It's a very good article, and she sent me the whole thing. And I shouldn't say it's a very good article. I believe it's a well-written article that put forth my opinion on what Donald Trump said a week ago and what Sergei Lavrov said over the weekend. Because both of these countries, our country and the Russians, according to Lavrov, are now looking into starting up again underground or other nuclear testing. Okay, now Trump, mistakenly, in my opinion, talked about everybody else is testing nuclear weapons. We're the only ones not testing. That is completely false. Nobody is testing nuclear weapons anywhere. They're using different platforms for the delivery of a nuclear weapon, but that is not the same thing. Okay, nuclear weapons testing is what I did for the last time when I was on site in 92, when the U.S. was finishing up its underground nuclear testing. We were the last ones to do one. And right after that, when the comprehensive threshold or the comprehensive test ban treaty went into effect, of course, it's gone into effect without being ratified, as I went into the other day. And now I have an article put out about that in Russia. And it starts out with my own personal experiences, just like I did here. And it's gotten a lot of views over there. The people are reading it and paying attention to it. So there was a guy to talk about. There's a guy named Dmitry Vidrin. If I pronounce that correctly, it could be Vidrin, but I'm pretty sure it's Vidrin. And he wrote an article that I have translated, which I'm going to share with you. That is maybe a 5-7 minute read that I can provide to you. And that is, his article was published on November the 10th. Today, obviously, and it was. It's called "From Nuclear Testing to Nuclear Upbringing: The Russian Way," and so I'm going to share this with you. Dmitry Vidrin. Not long before the Union collapsed, I read a much-discussed novella in a then-popular magazine. I no longer remember the author or the title. The small details of the plot have faded too. But the essence of the story seems to have stayed with me. On a tiny island, almost the last people on the planet found themselves miraculously saved from a nuclear apocalypse. A Soviet commander of a nuclear submarine who had taken part in Armageddon, an American pilot, a Russian girl, the girlfriend of our captain. How they ended up there isn't important. The intrigue lay in the nature of their relationship. After much inner torment, the young woman makes her choice. She moves from the hut of the strong and courageous but narrow-minded and ideologically blinded submariner to the little wigwam of the pilot. Radiation-stricken but advanced and humane. She cannot accept or forgive Russian narrowness and stupidity. For the sake of defending some state, their captains pressed red buttons and destroyed the world. The irradiated Yank is different. He stood above state ambitions and propaganda cliches. He lived and died for universal values. The sort of hero, a tanka, fallen to the earth, but destined to bloom again, the ailing chrysanthemum. I'll admit, at the time, I sympathized more with the pilot. I'd have gone to his shack myself. And I wasn't alone. Already at the Moscow Mint, hefty medallions, ruble dollars, were being struck out of the cladding of cut-up missiles. There was a firm belief then that the uniting of our two huts would, in tandem, equalize our currency's exchange rates. Already, polls were being conducted among commanders of strategic missile carriers about their willingness to press the button. Officers ready to refuse the political leadership's orders were extolled. Already. In short, back then, there was a lot connected with the denigration of those who supported the nuclear shield and nuclear deterrence. Perhaps there was its own logic. Defense, especially one paid for at an exorbitant price, presupposes a worthy object of protection. Only then does the cry, "We will not spare the cost," arise spontaneously within the social organism, rather than being imitated by sly ventriloquists. Excuse me. That is, the misfortune of the Union of Unions was that the might of the chief means of defense at a certain stage fell into dissonance with the set of spiritual and material goods which it sheltered and sanctified and explained. Not every good is perceived as a good if it isn't lit, for example, by art or ideology for that matter. I had a remarkable acquaintance, Valery Vereskul, commander of a regiment of Soviet Tu-160 strategists stationed near Poltava. He told me how the American partners, already in the new times, sicked the aviation ground crews on the Swans, which is the Tu-160, by suggesting that their bellies held a vast trove of precious metals. The pilots, hand in hand, resisted the attacks of greedy warrant officers as best they could. Those men, armed with wire cutters, crowbars, and screwdrivers, were tearing into the perfect bodies of aircraft, gnawing at their very insides. Once the colonel came to my home straight from the airfield. He drank the hard stuff without getting drunk. On television, in a live broadcast, we watched the Yankees with gigantic pincers like monstrous crabs, snipping the most perfect machines in the world in two. Today, the Americans are supplying their combat aircraft to Ukraine. Back then, they were slicing up Soviet ones on Soviet territory. Along the way, Valery recalled an old story. how his unit once received an order to deliver a nuclear strike against America's West Coast. He himself opened the envelope with the combat order in flight. He cut his finger on the sharp wax seal. The whole text was in blood, and through the blood the substance of the order emerged, split into threes, and attacked the principal targets of the potential adversary. He was shaking with a nervous tremor, but not from fear, not from a premonition of the end of the world, rather from a sense of greatness, that he represented a state capable of delivering an unthinkable answer to any conceivable threat. Pride in his country and in himself drowned out all other thought and doubt. The true colonel admitted that he never told anyone afterward about that inner state of his. Times were coming when people suddenly began to be ashamed of such feelings, no longer proud of them. The Union collapsed when its politicians lost the secret of initiating both elite military men and ordinary civilians into this sense of greatness, when they began to mock that feeling. In a true hologram, even if it is broken, every fragment conveys the fullness of that image. In a true state, every citizen bears the imprint of a common greatness. In a sham state, the imprint is of powerlessness. All these thoughts were prompted by the report that the United States is going to resume nuclear testing. Trump is already trembling, and he should be trembling. As I recall, we were the first to stop them, the testing, in the 90s. Yes, out of the most peaceful motives do the Russians want war. But just before its dissolution, the country had also begun to be ashamed of its own nuclear might and to be embarrassed by its international influence, its sovereign essence, and its complex history. Nuclear weapons in our world are not only an indicator of military technical potential, they are a projection of political will. If there is no will, there is nothing to test. If there is no faith, there is nothing to defend. Important, isn't it? The Americans stopped testing much later than we did. It wasn't much later. It was only like a year and a half. For entirely different reasons. The main opponent, as they thought, had disappeared, died. So why spend the money? Thrifty people, but not always understanding. They didn't notice, apparently, he's talking about Americans, how the wheel of history turns. They, after all, thought that history had ended. My old acquaintance, Francis Fukuyama, slyly convinced the whole country that Americanism had triumphed fully and finally. But history is relationships, and relationships take shape among those who are taken into account. The states didn't intend to take anyone else into account because there was no one to take into account, no one to fear, and even less to respect. And suddenly, Russia rose from the ashes. From the very ashes strewn along the symbolic road in Cormac McCarthy's novel that is unknown to me personally. In his brilliant tale, The Road, about a post-nuclear journey of a father and son, the writer merely reminded the American reader that the world may be left only with roads strewn with dust, radioactive dust. It turned out they do have someone to fear. Us, because our motherland has will, it has faith in its path, and it has something to defend. That is why the topic of American nuclear testing suddenly arose. assuming, of course, they have preserved the competencies in this sphere. I spoke on that in my article and in my show last week. Fear does not always substitute for technology, and only our country, this is a Russian guy, possesses the technical ability to respond in a mirror fashion, and fatally, and instantly, which, by the way, is unreal for the states themselves. One serious commentator made a slip of the tongue. He called nuclear testing nuclear upbringing, and that slip, as they say, hit the mark. For a quarter century, the big boys across the ocean were bringing us up. Today, the process has begun in the opposite direction, it so happens. I found that article enlightening. Now, you may disagree. I mean, I don't agree or disagree with it. It's just a different point of view. But there's something to be spoken about here. My article on nuclear testing that I put out had to do with the mistakes of how I grew up, how where I cut my teeth on international relationships and in the testing, how I felt that there were possibilities to have a peaceful coexistence, to have, I don't know what, mutual development, mutual growth, mutual understanding. The Russians, this article, what you need to understand about it, the Russians are quite proud of their country, just like we're proud of our own. And they should be. There is no reason for them not to be extremely proud of their country. They are doing things. They have, even in this article, it's very clear that many Russians, and I've met bunches of them, I've seen it personally, by the way, they have risen up from the ash heap of the Soviet Union, and a lot of them feel that they were betrayed back then by the leaders, by the Gorbachevs of the world, by the Yeltsins especially of the world, and some of the things that they did, they are demonized for what they did at that time. And the Russians, first of all, it is a great country. Second of all, they have every reason to understand that they are a great country, just like us. And one of the things that they never get is parity. They never get treated like an equal by the United States. They just don't. And now Trump comes close. And he is one of the first to come close. It's is Trump, but even so, he changes his mind every time he turn around. His mind is changing, and it does drive me somewhat crazy that he does so. And so, I don't know. I very much liked that article. I'm going to do a little bit of looking into. I have to type something here. Sorry about that. I have quite a bit more to go into, and I have to get to it, but I have to type in order to get there. And I have quite a bit more to go into. So please be patient with me, because I will get there in just a second. Let's see. I'm trying to get I just have a very hard time doing two things at once, and all I'm trying to do is get to the right page of where I'm going. So let's see here what we are going to do. Now I can focus on where I'm supposed to be. There were quite a few interesting articles that I covered today and interesting videos that I was able to summarize for you a little bit of Maria Zakharova's Friday, a little bit last night, and there is more to go into tonight from several different sources. And there's been quite a if you were on the front lines, and like I go through my mappers, and I followed today. There were some serious advances on the Russian side today as well. And yesterday we covered quite a bit about the blackouts and about the lack of heat, and the even getting to the lack of water, that is going to be there over the winter. But today I wanted to start with a story of some of the Western outlets that are finally acknowledging the uncomfortable truth that Zelensky has a dark side, that there's an uncomfortable side of Zelensky, especially as a wartime presidency. Centralization of power, prosecutions that look like, what happened to Trump, this lawfare. These are rampant over there. Media space that targets people, that there is no freedom of speech, that doesn't exist. And then, all kinds of martial law antagonistic stuff. These people being taken into custody, basically, and thrown on the front lines, bribery schemes that are going on, all of this. Politico's latest piece calls it Zelensky's dark side. So let's dig into that a little bit. So the case that is making waves is a guy named Volodymyr Kudrytsky, who's the ex-head of Ukrenergo. He was sacked last year loudly after grid failures during Russia's airstrikes. 2 independent board members quit in protest, called the firing political, right? So get rid of Volodymyr Kudrytsky. But it wasn't, obviously it wasn't his fault that these things are coming apart. Russia's just bombing the snot out of them. This is being taken care of. But they called it. Fast forward, now he's being charged with fraud tied to the 2018 substation contracts. A Kiev court ordered custody with bail at around 14 million, and he posted it and walked, calling it all political. Lawmakers from multiple parties stood up for him in court. This isn't a fringe protest. This is institutional pushback, right? Saying that he's not what they do, if you disagree with Zelensky, if you cross him in some way, or if he just wants to target you, the political thesis is the president will come out, President Zelensky will come out and take you out, and they will keep on digging. Then they will charge you with the next round. So they sacked him. That wasn't enough to get rid of his popularity, so then they charged him with fraud and taking money having to do with contracts back in 2018. So, critics call this lawfare. Supporters say, not so fast. These are real irregularities, and wartime requires a firm hand. Well, sure, but this corruption happened before that, right? And so, yes, wartime powers harden pretty quickly, but wartime doesn't nullify what the standards are. You can charge corrupt and still follow the rules, which Zelensky doesn't, and that is the test. So if you can check it out, you have to follow the rules, and Politico says they're not. So let's talk about the centrist line. If the state has the goods on somebody, I would agree that if they have evidence, chain of custody, independent oversight, bring it on. Those are the things that should be charged. If not, stop dressing up vendetta against a political enemy in judicial robes. We're very used to this in America as well. You bring charges against a political enemy. The government backs it up. You bring them in front of the right judge. That judge helps you in backing these things up. The Kudrytsky case is a bellwether case. It'll show us whether Ukraine's anti-corruption banner is a shield or a sword. And because the defendants team includes MPs from the members of parliament from across both factions, I don't believe this case is going to go away anytime soon. So his arrest. Many people there. The OSW, it's a Polish newspaper, is saying that his arrest is this Kudrytsky, the guy who ran the Energo, Ukrenergo, that his arrest is an attempt to intimidate the representatives in the Verkhovna Rada, which is their parliament, right? And so now the part the Western press still seems to sidestep. Things like, remember the case of Gonzalo Lira, the Chilean-American blogger who died in Ukrainian custody in January 2024. And he was taken into custody only because of his opinions against the Ukrainian government, against Zelensky. You don't have to like his ideas to demand humane detention and transparent accountability after his death in custody. You don't have to agree with what he said. But the man shouldn't have died in custody. And he was an American and Chilean blogger. All he was a guy over there telling his opinion. And he died for it. And he died because they just left him, to die. That is basic human rights. U.S. outlets did complain the death, but many did not. The State Department complained that there wasn't any proper notification. That's not Russian disinformation, by the way. That's public record. They weren't told. The State Department knew nothing, and they didn't get it. Another one another name in activist media circles and all of this is about Zelensky regime not being the good guys. Okay. So Kudrytsky, Gonzalo Lira, and there's another name, Bohdan Sirotyuk, a leftist opposition figure that was detained for justifying aggression and subversion per Ukrainian authorities. What does that mean? Mainstream outlets are all quiet. Socialist sites are not. You can discount ideology and still spot the pattern. If you have harsh speech plus a war, means a very small window for allowing the freedom thereof, this freedom to speak. And so, you need to handle such things with care, but the people are still being arrested. That comes from from Le Monde, the French newspaper, that says that Ukraine is intensifying in its controversial methods for military mobilization. They're beating the snot out of people and taking them into custody, right? And so let's talk a little bit on mobilization. Forced conscription. And all this is anti-Zelensky from the Politico article. On forced conscription, there are videos of draft officers grabbing men, beating them, and throwing them into minibuses. These things go viral all the time. There's a slang term that they call it busification. Has actually become the Ukrainian word of the year for 2024. In a respected lexicon poll of what the words are, how they are. This tells you how common and resented busification has become. It is not popular with what the Ukrainians and how they are affecting people. So wartime mobilization isn't pretty in any country, but a government that was somewhat wise, which they claim that Zelensky's is not. I happen to agree. A wise government would minimize these spectacles and abuse. It seems to be going on. And then there was, and I spoke about this a little bit last night. So now, Angelina Jolie and her saga. Yes, the now famous checkpoint incident. And it wasn't famous until a couple of days ago. Reports say, which I shared with you last night, Angelina Jolie's local driver or bodyguard, we don't know which, was detained, routed to a draft center during her unannounced visit to Kherson and Mykolaiv. Reuters confirmed the visit. Multiple outlets report the driver's story. Ukrainian military posts appeared about the story but then got deleted. Later statements were hedging the bets. The outcome is still quite fuzzy. We don't know what happened to this guy. He put a video out of his own saying that he was going to stay in the army, but he appeared pretty well subdued, let's call it. That was a subdued dude right there. But the Ukrainian post appeared, got deleted. Later, the statements come out, but they're hedging their bets. Nobody says anything. The outcome remains fuzzy, but the optics of all of this are pretty brutal. If your best defense is a paperwork issue, they're talking about his paperwork, but they seized him, took him into custody, sending him to the front lines and, forcing him to be conscripted. Your mobilization rules might need a what's the popular saying here in America? An adult in the room, especially somebody with a PR adult in the room, somebody that could talk to you about this stuff. So that also looks pretty bad. People are, the name of this article is or one of the articles is that people are finally realizing that Zelensky is not one of the good guys. That he's not as good as he claims to be, and he's certainly not a man of the people, as they've claimed, and his party was named, as kind of a hats off to his prior TV show, Man of the People, that he was a school teacher turned into president of Ukraine, right? And then he did it in reality. So a democracy at war has to be twice as pure as an autocracy at peace. If Kiev wants to join the EU club on rule of law terms, it has to show that its prosecutions aren't a presidential office hobby, and that mobilization isn't a street mafia lottery, right? The Kudrytsky trial, the guy from Ukrenergo, is a chance to show us something. Win it on evidence, not on intimidation. And maybe my skepticism and other Westerners' skepticism might go away, might be lessened. But lose it on process. I mean, like here, I don't trust our process anymore, frankly, in America. Everything is political here, and it's the same. It's 10 times worse in Ukraine. But lose it on process, and the dark side that Politico talks about, that phrasing will actually be, seen as not enough. Calling it a dark side, it'll be, geez, the guy's just corrupt as hell, And so it's, I don't know. There are a lot of people out there that are now openly saying that Zelensky is not one of the good guys. Now, I haven't been saying good, bad, or indifferent. I've just been saying that he has overstayed his welcome, and he needs to have an election, and he's not doing it. And why not? Because he doesn't want to give up the power. There's no reason he couldn't have an election right now. If you're so into democracy, EU, so into supporting Ukraine, Jesus, have some good elections. Have some something come out on this. What else is there? There's plenty to discuss on this. As Zelensky, on the election question, he says he's open to elections. His latest came from Reuters. And when was this? Back in late August. Zelensky is the last time he was questioned about elections, at least publicly. That he says back then, he said he was open to elections when it's safe and legal after the war. That's the same line that he's been given all summer. And is that sensible, under martial law? I don't know. You can still support Ukraine's defense if you wish to, and you can still support Zelensky. But I think it's important to insist on what they call rule of law in institutions and in elections. I think that's the only kind of support that would last, right? Let's talk about anti-corruption. Ukrainians NABU, that's that special anti-corruption prosecution that say they've run a 15-month probe with 1,000 hours of audio targeting high-level schemes of influence at Energoatom and other state companies. The code name is Midas. Real subtle. They raided properties linked to former energy minister Herman Halushenko and a businessman named Timur Mindik, long tagged in Kiev gossip groups as close to the president's circle from the Kvartal 95 days. Now, Kvartal 95 was Zelensky's TV comedy channel or program called Kvartal 95, 95th block, basically. A kvartal is a block. And so this came from 16 hours ago from the Ukrainian newscasts. So who's who of these? They're targeting more people for corruption. Ukrainskaya Pravda, Ukrainian Pravda, Truth, reported the raids. Many outlets say that this Mindik left the country hours before that. Several reports claim U.S. interest in his past dealings, especially in the Odessa port plant. But Ukrainian media say the FBI might be looking. That's not a U.S. and DOJ indictment. It's a leak. And so we need to, treat that accordingly. But what is really going on, nobody knows, because these stories come out, and this Naboo but they're attacking a Zelensky guy here. And I'm not so sure if this is going to be, he left the country. So the core allegation is a group of insiders skimmed 10 to 15% through controlled contractors, steered personnel decisions, and channeled the cash. Classic capture. And Naboo, this agency we've talked about before, that is backed by and supposed to be outside of the typical Ukrainian. They're not controlled by the presidency, or not supposed to be, but they terminated that several months ago, and then they brought it back allegedly without any change. But I don't know that I trust it at all anymore. But they said they have photos of the cash and clips of the audio files. If it's verified in court, this isn't going to be small potatoes. This is going to be pretty big patronage chain if that has to be closed if Ukraine wants to enter the EU. So why does this matter besides any details? Because it pits still independent anti-graft bloc in civil society against the president's office, right? Against Zelensky's office. Kiev has tried to coordinate, they call it coordination, of these agencies, but it didn't stick because the West wants to keep it clean, and but as if we're clean. I don't know how that's going to work, but a clean Midas case would show that the system actually works. If it's a botched one and the guy gets away with it, like he will, then it will be selective justice. Note that ergo Adam is strategic. Screw this up and you spook the rest of Europe's energy partners, right, which are already spooked in the first place. So UP published a long piece hinting that the operation may have been compromised, that a deputy might have tipped the targets, that it was, if that's true, that's a prosecutor's office with a hole in it, with a leak. It's a leaky vessel. It's a rat ship of seagoing snitches. Do you remember that from... what was the name of that show? I don't know, but it was Al Pacino as a colonel. If false, this is factional mud. Either way, every leak weakens chain of custody confidence, and anti-corruption is just a theater in that case. And I think this is just a theater. I've talked about this sort of thing for years. If you want to break a corrupt system, you don't get to just perp walk a villain. You have to make the rules harder to bend or break. That means public open data by default. It means sign-offs on multi-level sign-offs on energy contracts and stuff like that. They aren't going to be third-party audits. They're not going to be able to do any of this, and protected whistleblowers. Right now, they're not. This is, for them, this is like going to be climbing up Mount Everest. It's, what percentage of those people actually make it or don't make it and die? This is a critical legal scaffold, and I don't believe they're going to make it. But if U.S. law enforcement, if U.S. FBI is truly sniffing around these players' offshore webs of money, it might come out eventually. Filings, indictments, but until then, the FBI is onto him as they're trying to report in Ukraine. It's rhetoric, and it's nothing. It's uncorroborated. Kiev's domestic knife fight, trying to say it's got rumors about Washington being involved. I think it's I think it's nonsense. So I don't think that story is going to go anywhere. I'll keep an eye on it, but corruption in Ukraine, geez, what else is new? Tell me something. But people are talking about this as if it's going to matter. So I thought I'd share it with you if you think that it's gonna matter, but I don't think it's going to. So, I wanted to talk about one other. This is efforts on the ground, and specifically in Pokrovsk. But you know what? I wanted to get to that Mamdani story. I wonder if I should go to that first. Where is it? Well, let's talk. You know what? Let's do that because I might not be able to get done with this. Let's call it the Mamdani experiment. The left turn of New York, the mandate, the math, and the next 18 months that I was talking about a little bit on Russian TV this morning. And it was only a 5-minute interview. It was nothing serious. So this shouldn't go on all that long. But New York City just hired a 34-year-old Ugandan-born Democratic Socialist to run the biggest municipal government in America. And that's not the start of a stand-up routine. It's actual news. Zoran Mamdani beat Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Silva and will walk into City Hall with a promise list that leads like Scrooge McDuck, his wish list. Rent freezes, free buses, universal child care, city-owned grocery stores. Voters said, try it out. Now he has to make it work legally, fiscally, practically. Who he is, how he won, what he can actually do, and what trips him the second he gets into office. If you want to understand him, start with a resume that your guidance counselor warned you about. He's the son of a renowned scholar and a filmmaker. He grew up between Kampala and New York and rapped under the name Young Cardamom. He curated the Queen of Katwa soundtrack, dropped a track with Medher Joffrey in the video, and then pivoted into foreclosure prevention work and Queen's housing fights. Only in New York could that tumble dryer of a life story spit out a mayor. He won a state assembly seat in 2020 out of Astoria and made his name in the streets as much as in the chamber, most visibly by joining taxi drivers in a hunger strike that helped trigger hundreds of millions in debt relief. That episode branded him as a politician who doesn't just signal solidarity, he'll sleep on the sidewalk to get a headline. That's not normal in America, and voters did notice. So fast forward to 2025. He ran for mayor on affordability gospel. And it wasn't theoretical Marxism, it's New York nuts and bolts. You can't afford rent, the bus is slow and pricey, child care costs a second mortgages, and eggs cost like you're flying them in from Zurich. He promised a rent freeze by steering the rent guideline board. Free buses, universal child care, and a chain of city-run grocery stores to pressure prices down. That simple, repeated message was amplified by a large volunteer machine, and it did the job. He did not just inch across the finish line with roughly 51% of a high turnout electorate. He cleared Cuomo by a healthy margin. It wasn't a base-only squeaker. This matters, right? He had a near mandate. Who's the coalition? Young renters, Muslim voters, parts of organized labor, plenty of outer borough families drowning in bills. You know things are shifting when the man who wants to make the bus free gets love from some transit union leaders who are usually allergic to that sort of experiment. So the first Muslim New York City mayor, first South Asian, first open Democratic Socialist, and we'll keep these national cameras pinned on him for a long time. And that notoriety cut both ways. It buys leverage and it invites 24/7 pile-on if anything goes poorly. What did he promise? Let's break that down. The city hall rent freeze. The rent guideline board. Is 9 members, all appointed by the mayor. It sets annual rent adjustments for stabilized apartments, about 1 million units. Changes don't happen by decree; they move by appointments, hearings, and votes. Translation: he can't wave a wand, but stacked appointees and clear directive make freeze plausible. He might possibly able to do it. Procurement, pilot, and city-funded offset. City Hall can pilot free service where it pays the bill. That matters for buses because the MTA is state-controlled, but the city already subsidized part of the bus network and can do it if it writes the check. City money offsets foregone fares on selected routes. Building from the state's 5-route fare-free pilot, it's doable. He actually might be able to do it. What about city-run groceries? The idea is to stand up rent and tax-exempt municipal stores in food-insecure neighborhoods. Cities have played in this sandbox feasibility studies in Boston, postmortems in Chicago, and rural municipal stores from Kansas to Alabama. Some work, some flop. New York can pilot a few locations, staff them well, site them well, partner like crazy. Execution is going to be the ballgame. People don't know if that's going to work. Universal child care. The city can expand 3K and pre-K at the margins. Universal cradle to kindergarten is multi-billion-dollar territory. Libraries, and budgets combined. Even friendlier comptrollers call the out-year gap alarming without new revenue. And this looks like it's probably not going to happen. New millionaire and business taxes. The mayor cannot unilaterally raise income and corporate tax. He can propose, lobby, and threaten, but the legislature and the governor have the gavel. Even sympathetic analysts warn about flight risk if you overshoot the mark and say you're going to tax every new millionaire. It's not going to happen, in other words. Local minimum wage above the state level. New York preempts locals from freelancing a wage floor. There are bills to let cities set their own minimum wages. They've died before. Expect him to revive them at City Hall. But again, Albany will probably cut them down. What's the bottom line? Mamdani can quickly move on rent equalization, target fare-free pilot programs, but the rest he can only negotiate. So what's the New York laugh versus, the adopted fiscal year 26 budget is around $116 billion. The city's independent scorekeepers say that the gap is in the 8 to 10 billion range when you talk about predictable under budgeting and mandates they can't get rid of. If you add universal health care and large transit operating subsidies, you're not nibbling, you're asking this Thanksgiving table to last, a year or two. It's not going to happen. Millionaire tax and corporate hikes, great TV, hard to pass in law, and that won't be a miracle on him. Property tax reform, everybody loves the idea until they're the one that has to pay the freight. One-time money, you can squeeze some overtime, trim vendors, maybe slow some things, but the translation, he needs a sequencing plan to keep the money. So the politics, I don't think he's going to make it. I don't think he's going to be able to create most of these things. So New York, just bet on an idea with this guy. A mayor who grew up between Nairobi-bound flights and Queen streets can turn ideology into service. If Mamdani sticks to the do the next thing well, faster buses first, clean rent freeze, honest child care, ramp up, he might be more than a headline. He can't resist trying to rewrite the social contract. But, either way, the experiment matters because this will mean something. If it happens in New York, he might actually be able to go somewhere else, might be able to do something more. But I don't think so. Let's see. I wanted to do a little bit more, but it looks like that's going to be impossible because we're coming up on the end of the program. My name is Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor. We come to you every night, Sunday through Thursday, from the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. And we have a very good recording of them all. You can get them at damradio.com/podcast, or you can go to internationalflavor.com where each of my shows show up, and you can go back and listen to them in perpetuity for as long as you like. I very much appreciate your listenership. And if you want to get a hold of me, do so at SamuelT@internationalflavor.com. Good night.